So, availability of materials. Now, availability can have different impacts on different types of products depending on what the material is. I know that might sound obvious, but um, we have to remember that like the cost of things go up and down according to availability. And a crude description would be the less available the material is, the more expensive it is. For example, gold is traditionally known as being like one of the more expensive precious metals, more expensive than silver because it's just not quite as abundant, and yeah, and it can only be mined. It's only found in certain places around the world. Yeah, and that's really what determines the cost. Now, so when you're choosing a material for a product that you want that you're going to make, designers need to be really aware of like how available is the material. There's no point having a designer designing yeah, like a mobile phone and saying that they're going to make it from yeah, like 24 karat gold. Number one, mechanically, it's not appropriate. But number two, that the cost is too high. It's prohibitive, and that's because the availability of the material is not that high. So we need to be aware of this. Now, I've got this other example on here. This really nice like Chinese cabinet. This is actually made from a type of timber called rosewood. Some of you might have heard of the Rosewood hotel chain, but rosewood is an interesting one because this is a tropical timber, and it's a hardwood. And these trees are only found really in tropical climates. Now, it's also not very abundant, so the value of it is very high. And I think in some countries it's actually illegal to use rosewood now. But what you got to think about here is like if you're going to use a valuable material to make a product, you've got to make sure that product is going to be then really nice or very very exclusive, so that you can justify using that expensive material. Um, I mean, just to show another example, but the ring here. I'm sure some of you will end up buying a ring of like this at some stage in your lives, maybe. But yeah, say this ring's made of white gold or platinum, and it's got a, I don't know, say like a 1.5 carat diamond in the middle. This is expensive in two ways. Number one, gold, again, like we said, is a precious metal. Platinum is even more precious, and even more expensive. Diamonds are very expensive. That's because diamonds are just not, they're not abundant. They're not found around the world in many places. And so because of that, they are expensive. Now, there's all sorts of other things that go with that, like people saying like, there's diamond companies that control the supply of diamonds around the world, and therefore they keep the price high because they limit the quantity of diamonds that they release. However, generally as it goes, that is what creates cost and creates yeah, it actually creates problems with manufacturing because it means that the choices we have for products is more limited. So I've got an image on here. You might be wondering what on earth this is, but this is a battery pack from a Tesla. And what's interesting here is talking about availability is lithium, used in batteries for loads of things like lithium-ion batteries. Yeah, is a material that is currently extremely expensive. Well, it's not extremely expensive actually. It's not that available because so many companies now are jumping onto the EV bandwagon. Suddenly, the demand for battery cells has skyrocketed. So, what's crazy is like something like 90% of the world's lithium refining for batteries is actually all done in China. So, think about this: like Tesla set up their gigafactory in Shanghai. That is where they actually make a lot of their battery cells. Now, the reason you could say that the reason that they actually built it in Shanghai instead of just keeping everything in the US is so that they can be near the supply. And in some ways, being near the supply means you can kind of help sort of take control of it a little bit, and you can sort of yeah, maybe even get into refining and mining your own lithium anyway, which is what Tesla's going to be doing. But yeah, it's actually quite interesting thinking about this because the availability of the material there, like say the lithium used for the batteries, is going to become more and more limited as time goes on. And so with that, it's going to affect the cost of the product, and therefore it will drive us to look at alternatives for energy sources. So that's really how availability plays in. I mean, going back to a much more sort of GCSE level example, if you're wanting to make a piece of furniture out of a timber that's incredibly rare, um, like say ebony or something, which is only really found in certain tropical countries, it will be very, very expensive. And then you've got to think, well, would my client be willing to pay that much for this product when I could just make it from, say, pine and it would be a lot cheaper? So we have to know how to analyze products based on the availability of the materials that it's made from. There's a little map here which I think is quite useful to look at. So it shows where the majority of trees are grown. Now, what we have to remember with trees is a lot of them are not what we call native to the land that they come from. So to understand where trees natively grow, you'd have to go back like hundreds and hundreds of years to look before people really migrated around the world. Where do trees actually naturally grow? What's their natural habitat? A very crude example is in what we call temperate zones and cooler climates, you tend to get softwoods. So things like pine trees, spruce, cedar, redwood, Scots pine. Those all grow in like sort of colder regions. When you go right to when you go right to the tropics and the equator in the middle there, you get more things like like these tropical woods, like rosewood, balsa wood. In Asia, we get ones like soraya, which are grown a lot in like Indonesia and Malaysia. Um, like ebony, and you get the idea. You can see just the number of trees, but things like a spruce tree, I'd be very surprised if that's actually native to India and Burma. That's probably the case that it's been deliberately planted there by people that moved to that country maybe hundreds of years ago. It's a little bit like in the UK, actually. Fir trees, so when we're saying fir trees, it means spruce and pine and stuff. Fir trees are not native to the UK. It was like, I don't know, Victorians or something like that, when they went traveling, they saw these trees. Thought, oh, that's nice, and then they brought the seeds back, they planted them, and then suddenly there's fir trees growing there, but they're not native to the UK. More like oak and willow and things like that are much more sort of native to the UK. So that's the important thing to bear in mind is where the materials grow, and then how does that affect the availability of them.